Le gouvernement suisse a décidé de s'aligner complètement avec les sanctions européennes. Il va faire exactement la même chose que nous. C'est très bien. C'est parfait. C'est une mauvaise nouvelle pour la Russie. Mais du point de vue de l'unité du monde, disons, occidental et du point de vue de l'applicabilité, de l'efficacité de ces sanctions financières, par exemple, tous les actifs que soient déposés dans la Banque centrale suisse, je ne sais pas s'il y en a ou pas, ou combien, ils seront gelés.
But they'll be frozen anyway, whatever they are. And it'll be no use to the oligarchs to transfer their assets now to Switzerland, because Switzerland's going to do the same thing as we are. That's very, very good news. Now, the second question? The sanction would allow him to travel to there are diplomatic exceptions. We didn't go so far as to ban Mr. Lavrov's possibility for flying to Geneva for diplomatic reasons. If it's holidays, no, he can't.
Is this Naomi? Yes, please, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks very much. Naomi O'Leary, Irish Times. I have two quick questions, if I could, High Representative. The first one is about cyber attacks. Can you confirm any cyber attacks of Russian origin? For example, we've had a major attack on Toyota, as one example. The second question is about hidden assets. In every harbour of the Mediterranean, there are mega yachts proudly flying the flags of tax havens, where their ownership is concealed by shell companies, and many of their owners are Russian oligarchs whose names are very well known. How will we identify the ownership of those? Will they be affected? Will they be seized? And what about cryptocurrencies? Are there any steps taken, given the design of crypto, to be peer-to-peer and to evade regulation? Thank you.
I'm not
aware, and I don't have any information about the attack on a specific company. But there have been cyber attacks against various ministries in Ukraine and against the media in Ukraine. Obviously, Russia is launching cyber attacks. I'm not aware of this one that you've mentioned, but we are trying to help Ukraine fight these cyber attacks, and that will be part of the aid that we'll provide. Now, hidden assets, they're the subject of actions that were, sanctions that were approved. We'll have to locate them, and we will have to take action. I'm not going to go to European ports to try to pinpoint these yachts, but of course we have means to do that.
Jean-Pierre, tu avais demandé la parole.
Jean-Pierre, you had asked for the floor. Mr. High Representative, good afternoon. Could you clarify one thing regarding something you were saying yesterday about the fact that one was going to grant fighter planes to Ukraine? Could you give us details? Which countries are going to provide Ukraine with fighter jets? They'll be piloted, these planes, these countries giving them to Ukraine. Would that mean they be involved in the conflict, which means a European presence? It's not that. I was a bit, perhaps you could clarify what you were saying yesterday.
No se preocupe.
Do not worry. With the 500,000 euros that we've mobilized, although we wouldn't be able to mobilize many fighter jets with 500 million. So what we're talking about is what we decided together. Members may, some European countries, if they want to, bilaterally can mobilize any kind of aid to help Ukraine to defend itself. And they also need aircraft. And that's a part of requests for aid that we have received from Ukraine. But they would have to be those European countries, if they have them, that have fighter jets which could be piloted by the Ukrainian Air Force pilots, who will then be using them in practice.
Can I take another question?
If it is easy, si es fácil, sí.
Thomas, your question is easy or no? And fast.
Tomasz Bielecki, Deutsche Welle, Gazeta Wyborcza. Yes, it would be easy. I was going to ask about fighter jets, but it answered. So, you've mentioned also yesterday about the Poland serving as a hub for this military help, EU help for the Ukraine. And today ministers decided, as you said, on creating the clearing.
Emergency doors. In the event of a fire or an emergency which requires an evacuation, please use the west side emergency doors and the stairway next to the elevator banks. Those in the third and the fourth balconies, please use the stairway next to the elevator banks. I now invite representatives to stand and observe 1 minute of silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. I should now like to draw the Assembly's attention to Rule 63, which states, notwithstanding the provisions of any other rule and unless the General Assembly decides otherwise, the Assembly, in case of an emergency special session, shall convene in plenary meeting only and proceed directly to consider the item proposed for consideration in the request for the holding of the session, without previous reference to the General Committee or to any other committee. The President and Vice Presidents for such emergency special sessions shall be, respectively, the Chairman of those delegations from which were elected the President and Vice Presidents of the previous session. I shall repeat the first part of that rule.
As we continue to monitor the latest coming in from the United Nations General Assembly that is holding that rare emergency session on the Ukraine crisis, let's get in further perspectives from a Ukrainian diplomat, Vasyl Flipchuk, who is currently the chairman of the International Center for Policy Studies, who is with us on the broadcast. Vasyl, what's your expectation at this point from the UNGA session, from the talks that are currently underway between Russia and Ukraine as well?
Well, let's differentiate UNGA and Ukraine-Russian talks. On UNGA, I have been personally calling for, since first day of this crisis, and also even before, when this story started in 2014, that with a view of situation in the UN Security Council and Russian veto right, it's basically impossible to get any decision from UN on Ukraine's related issues. So that's why the only way is to use United for Peace resolution, which allows in exceptional cases when UN Security Council is unable to adopt any decision for General Assembly to adopt the decision. So it was more than needed to conduct this session, and it's probably the only way UN can play a role now in the situation. We expect that UNGA special session should adopt decision on enforcement of Russia to peace, to declare no-fly zone over Ukraine, and to authorize goodwill countries to start help Ukraine with both military assistance, but also as humanitarian assistance. I would like especially emphasize the last one, as I hear every day more and more evidences from my country about worsening humanitarian situation, about shops with no food, people who might have start starving in 2, 3, 5 days. And as Russians seem not to make any step back, it's going to be really there, and UN must act in this respect. But even more important for UN as a key organization for security in the world is to show finally that they are capable to make some efficient step to stop it. We have some well-known phenomena of humanitarian intervention. So it's now time for UN to ask for humanitarian intervention into Ukraine to stop suffering, and finally to punish those who are responsible for this invasion of Russian troops to my country. On the second point you asked about Ukraine-Russian negotiations, I'm, to be frank, not very optimistic, as positions of both sides are too different. I do not see really any zone of possible agreement. In the best case scenario, they could agree about humanitarian corridors and easing of suffering of population, but I do not see any other issues on what they can agree. Yes, Ukraine side proposed something which is huge concession from Ukraine side, like to discuss neutrality status of the country, but I think it's far away from what the Russians would need now. So maybe miracles can happen, but for the moment I do not see a huge success for these negotiations today.
Right. What is your assessment of the support that's come in from the West so far? How satisfied are you with that?
Well, to be frank, it's more than I expected. I didn't expect so quick and effective response from EU side. Yesterday, EU finally acknowledged that Ukraine can be a part of European Union. EU, first time in its history, started to provide a third country with military assistance. We see how international efforts are gathered about sanctions, and sanctions on Russia is a good start, but it should be more and tougher sanctions on Russia. But as always, we say in these cases, it's too late. It's certainly too late, and it's not enough yet. So I presume world has to face this unprecedented invasion, act of aggression from Russian side with unprecedented answers. I think that really we all have to discuss issue of Russia expulsion from all the international organizations, country and president of the country which makes actions like that have no seat among civilized nation. No country may keep ambassadors of this country on their territory if they justify this massacre which Russian forces are doing now in Ukraine. So sanctions and Western response is not bad. We are, for the moment, we could consider it's okay, but it must be tougher, stronger, and more efficient and quicker.
Right, so the Russia-Ukraine talks are taking place even as Russia continues to mount that offensive against major Ukrainian cities. Just a short while back, we had images of fresh shelling in the second biggest city of Kharkiv. What do you make of the messaging that Russia has been trying to put across, putting out this narrative that it is ready for dialogue while continuing to attack Ukrainian cities?
I've seen these horrible pictures of shelling residential areas, people who were just killed on streets, pensioners, people 70, 80 years old killed by Russian missile on streets of Kharkiv. It's really unthinkable. It's horrible tragedy. It's the second biggest city, Russian-speaking, always very friendly to Russia. And now, after it happened, it just cannot come to our mind to explain why, what you gain by killing innocent people. As I understand, Mr. Putin is now in dead end. He probably expected to have quick win, blitzkrieg, as we say, but it failed. He probably expected to have a walk as they had in Crimea in 2014, but it's very different. Current Ukraine really hates Russian invaders, and millions of Ukrainians are ready to die to defend them. So with the view of lack of quick progress in the realization of his plan, Mr. Putin will raise stakes and increase military attacks on Ukraine. As attacks with human force is quite difficult because Russian soldiers don't really understand what they are doing in Ukraine, why they came, and they see how Ukrainians hate them. So the only way is just to use artillery missiles as they don't feel anything and try to threaten Ukraine with more losses. I think it all will have just counterproductive effect. The more they kill us, the more Ukrainians will hate and will fight, and I think Putin will pay a high price for that.
Right. Going back to talking about the UNGA session, which is currently underway, we are standing by for that session as we also expect the UN chief to address in just a short while from now. But these talks, the statements of condemnation, as a Ukrainian diplomat, how does it really make sense to have these statements being delivered at a time when the country is undergoing this massive assault on part of Russia? And we've seen sanctions come in, but they've been categorized by many as being too little, too late.
Well, every war, it's a failure of diplomacy. And no war can be more failure of diplomacy than this war. You know, I have been for years and years proposing different ideas for peace deal, compromise between both sides. And I feel really terrible that all these proposals fall down and political populism was used by politicians from all the sides, and there was no real political leadership in getting diplomatic solution. Again, I think the role of UN is crucial and vitally important, but where was UN mediation? Where was UN international efforts? I propose, for example, to use UN peace force for Donbass settlement, which would certainly calm down the situation and help to avoid current war. But nothing was done. Everyone considered, wow, it's yet another frozen conflict on the territory of former Soviet Union. We have Transnistrian conflict, we have South Ossetia, we have Abkhazia conflict. Wow, it's another conflict, nothing tragic. And we all made a miscalculation. We miscalculated to what extent Putin how far he can go, and Putin made miscalculation of what response from our side, from all civilized world will be. So it's a big, big tragedy. It's a big lesson for all the future generations of diplomats, how desperate they must be to fight for peace. If they failed, horrible things like current war will come.
Right. Would you say that the West underestimated the Russian president?
Well, on one side, yes. On the other side, West has been telling us, US and UK, for the last 3-4 months, Russians are going to invade. And no one of us really believed. We underestimated him. No one from Ukraine's side believed he would make such a horrible crime. From US side, probably they were well aware about these plans.
Right. So WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.